is going to look at establishing communist control and how the 100 Flowers campaign was used to do that. So we're going to start with some of the causes of the campaign. Now, the campaign was launched in 1956, but prior to this, in 1951 and 1953 respectively, Mao launched the 3 Antis and the 5 Antis campaign. As part of those Antis campaigns, they were used to incite terror within China and use that as a method of maintaining control. They targeted corruption, bureaucracy and waste in the 3 Antis, and the 5 Antis targeted tax evasion, bribery, fraud, spying and theft. Now, the idea of those campaigns were to eliminate anybody within China who were pursuing those things, those factors, and it led to a climate of fear. Now, on top of this, in 1956, we also have the process of de-Stalinisation happening following the death of Stalin. Now, Mao saw the state of Hungary, the satellite state, where they were trying to purge themselves of Stalin's ideologies and Stalin's rules. He was worried about the same thing happening in China. So he launched the 100 Flowers campaign in May 1956 to try and counteract that. Here he stated, "Let 100 flowers bloom and let the intellectuals criticise my government." So the aim of this was to let the intellectuals come forward and support the government by offering their criticism. He wanted people to feel as if Mao was listening to them. As part of his 4 aims, he had issued the fact that he wanted mass mobilisation, he wanted nationalism, he wanted to show that he was listening to the people, and he wanted continuous revolution. And he felt that the 100 Flowers campaign would help to continue the revolution, mobilise the masses, and show that he was listening to the nation. However, initially people were very reluctant to come forward. They were concerned, because of the Great Terror, that if they were to speak up, it would lead to the same treatment of the people they had seen who had previously spoken up. They were worried that they would be forced to participate in a struggle session and would consequently be sent to Laogai for thought reform. Mao had felt quite frustrated by the lack of support for his campaign. He took to the stage in February 1957 to encourage people to come forward and published in the People's Daily newspaper, "Let 100 flowers bloom," in order to encourage people to join the campaign. So in the People's Daily, the Chinese national newspaper, he encouraged people to come forward and publish, either in writing or in person, their criticism. Now, initially, the criticism was coming in quite slowly, but then it started to flood in. And one person in particular was Hu Feng. He was a writer, and within his diary he wrote and listed some criticisms for both Mao and the CCP. Seeing this level of criticism, seeing the flooding in that was happening, Mao started to feel quite insecure. He was faced with a huge rush of criticism towards him, the government and the CCP, and felt overwhelmed. So in June 1957, he launched this thing called the Anti-Writers Campaign, which essentially reversed the 100 Flowers campaign. What it did was it forced leading critics to retract their statements. They were made to make public confessions and submit themselves to Laogai for thought reform. A number of these intellectuals were then sacked from their jobs. People were forbidden to speak freely, and the press was censored once again. As we said before, Hu Feng was a well-known example for this. He was also sent to a Laogai, where he was then eventually jailed and shot dead. So we can see that Mao felt quite overwhelmed, decided to start labelling people as rightists if they criticised the CCP, and led to the silencing of people once again. So it silenced criticism for the communist regime for at least a generation. The party unity was strengthened as Mao came back on top as leader, and he was able to weed out any opposition within the CCP. Intellectual life in China essentially came to a virtual standstill, and anybody who criticised the Communist Party were no longer part of it. they were removed and they could no longer hold their seat. So ultimately what the 100 Flowers campaign did was initially allow Mao to see what level of criticism would come forward, and then eventually act as a means of removing any opposition, any counter-revolutionaries both inside the party and within the population.